Welcome to another episode of Unleashing the Future of Work, a guide podcast. Today, I am joined by an amazing guest. But before I get into today's live episode, I want to show you love. If you're tuning in from wherever you're at right now, please put something in the comments just so we can say hi and recognize you and acknowledge you and just give you a high five, a virtual high five. With that said, today I am joined by the amazing Leo Polovets, who is the co-founder and general partner at Susa Ventures. And there's a really interesting story behind that. He invests across sectors, but mostly focuses on B2B companies. A few specific sectors are heavily in enterprise software, developer tools, technical products, logistics, and supply chain. He leads Susa Ventures investments in dozens of companies, including Outlier, PEX, Scalar, and Steady. I don't know if you've heard of any of them, but make sure you check them out. They're pretty awesome. Prior to Susa, he was a second engineering hire at LinkedIn. Shout out to LinkedIn because we're streaming live on LinkedIn right now, where he helped build the first versions of products like LinkedIn Jobs and Groups, which is like mind-boggling. He then worked on payment fraud detection algorithms at Google, and was also an early engineer at Factual, where he built data cleaning, processing, and deduping software. And we're really going to dive deep on Leo's background, as well as what inspired Susa, and more importantly, some of the trends that he's currently following right now in the technology industry. With that said, Leo, thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Thanks, Tim. I'm excited to be here. You made my background sound way more exciting than it is.
Dude, you have a pretty awesome background, man.
I've been pretty fortunate, but
so I would love for you to share a little bit more about, how you got your start in the technology industry, man.
Yeah. So in like high school, I was always like a big math geek. So I was one of the kids, I was president of math club. Like I was doing all the math contests. Thought I wanted to major math. And then I got to college and I took my first few kind of advanced level college math courses. And I was like, this doesn't feel like it's for me. It's like, it was a very different kind of math. And I was just like, not that excited by it. And so I was trying to, figure out what else I should do. And computer science is actually pretty close to math, but like more of the fun type of problem solving that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And so I switched to computer science pretty quickly. I had a few internships in college at actually a company my dad worked at the time, because he's also on the software side. So I was like an intern at a company called TIBCO, which was acquired by Reuters when I was there.
Wow.
So did a lot of like real-time messaging and things like that. I think they were the ones that digitized the stock market back in the 80s. So I had a few internships there, really enjoyed it. And then, so when I graduated college, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to like go work at, software companies. And so, yeah.
So, for you, were you always kind of, when you were younger, tinkering and building things? Because I know for me, I was always just inquisitive, curious. So I was always building puzzles. Like that was like my software back in the day. So I was always building puzzles and drawing on desk and things like that. And that for me, it just allowed me to be creative. So for me now, as we build Guide, I'm very I see building software as like a creative process. It's not just the technical thing. So for you, could you go back to your, early days, working with your dad? Was it just kind of like fun for you being in the same room with him?
Well, so we were kind of on the same team, but like more like we were on the same floor, but not not the same room.
Yeah.
Which it was definitely pretty cool, because I think, like as a kid, your dad comes home from work and you sort of ask him a little bit about it, but like you don't have any conception of like what they do or or like what the company is like or what it's like to even work somewhere. And so I think it was pretty cool that like my first experience was the same company as my dad. And that was something I enjoyed. But I definitely, even as a kid, I was doing a lot of like math and problem solving, and that was the kind of stuff I really liked. I would say probably more like thinking about things rather than building things. But then, the building part was also really fun once I got into that after college.
Yeah, no, that's powerful, man. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in tech right now, right? Because COVID-19 has completely shifted the landscape, and there's a lot of new products that are coming out to the market. I want to get your thoughts, man. What are like 2 to 3 trends that you're noticing right now that are just alluring to you?
I think a few trends that some of these have been going on for a while, and some are maybe just starting in the last few years. I think more and more adoption of voice is something I'm pretty excited about. and that comes in like different factors, right? So there's companies, for example, that'll analyze sales phone calls and like put the data in Salesforce. They'll give you some tips on like, hey, you should have mentioned this phrase, or like you should have, here's like a document you can use for this objection in the future. So I think stuff like that's really cool. Where like if you're in a setting where you're like fine having your voice recorded, you can get some insights or predictions or suggestions based on that. I think that's a really exciting area. I think RPA is pretty exciting, which is like robotic process automation. Because I think before it was like there are a lot of jobs where you have something repetitive and you want it automated. And before, like the two things you could do is one, like nothing, and you just keep doing it. Or two, like you go ask an engineer at your company, and then you wait, right? And sometimes they'll crank it out in a couple hours. Sometimes they're like, hey, I'm really busy. How about 3 months from now? And so I think people are like really dependent on the engineering teams. And now with all of these like no code, low code tools, RPA tools, like the RPA tools are specifically really interesting because you can sort of just like teach them a little bit about what you're doing for a task, and then they just copy it for you like over and over and over, almost like macros in Excel, but like for everything.
Yeah, it's actually pretty crazy. It's super powerful.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I think those kinds of tools are awesome because now like there's a bunch of people that'll be able to make their work more streamlined and without having to just like sit there and do manual chores, without having to like ask developers and wait. And so I think that's going to make people a lot more productive, and then they can focus on like the parts of the job that are not just like repetitive and more about maybe things that are interesting to them. And then I'd say maybe another trend is I think like machine learning and deep learning have been really democratized in the last 5 years or so. So, like 7 years ago, 6 years ago, if you want to do this stuff, there's not that many people doing it. You have to like recruit from a really small pool. Google's paying that small pool like a crap load of money. And today it's like, there's APIs where you could just like feed it some data and it's like, here's a prediction. And that's like all you have to do. And so I think once you have machine learning in a lot of companies, like that's also like a big level up from like products that don't use machine learning.
Yeah, I think what's so astounding too, and a lot of organizations haven't even caught on to it yet, is that you can completely build your models in the cloud now, right? You don't even need to hire data scientists if you have the will to learn and can watch a few YouTube videos or even some of Google's courses, Microsoft's courses. There's a wealth of information. You could find a machine learning designer or data scientist that's probably not in that role yet, and train them within 6 weeks. And to your point, it's completely been democratized, but there is still like a learning curve to it if you're not in the space. I want to ask you, Leo, man, like what do you think organizations will need to do to adapt to the times? Because I don't think a lot of organizations are at speed yet to the changes happening in the machine learning space.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think to your point, I do think education is probably like a big step, right? Which is you don't need to be like learning calculus or linear algebra or reading like the research papers, but I think it's good just to like, maybe look around every 6 months or 12 months and, just try to get a sense of like, are there interesting machine learning products out there? Are there like big innovations that are happening? Because I think a lot of like, if you had just been monitoring like what's coming out on, machine learning infrastructure for the last 10 years and just, like once a year you do a Google search, I think you would, probably like 3-4 years ago, you start seeing like, hey, now I don't need to hire a data scientist. Like here's like one API I could use. And then you wait a few more years and you're like, now it's not one API, it's like 100. And they all, like for different use cases. And so depending on what you want, you can just pick, oh, I'll take this one. Right. And now there's even tools where it's like, I think these kinds of models are really interesting where you give it a spreadsheet and you're just like, here's 20 columns like of data. And then like a 21st column of like, I'm trying to predict, will people click on this ad? And so you just give it, 100 rows of data and it builds a model for you. You don't have to like tune anything or configure anything. And then you're like, okay, here's a new data point. Here's the 20 attributes. Like, is this ad gonna, are people gonna click on it or not? And like, you just get an answer. And so I think those, you don't have to be like technical at all. You can just basically do it with spreadsheets.
I want to ask you, man, what do you think is, probably the greatest problem space entrepreneurs should be looking into right now to build solutions, whether it be leveraging voice, machine learning, or even, bots. I remember I used to love building bots when Facebook was actually focused on building their messenger and bot platform. And, that's actually what really got me involved and inspired to work with Microsoft not too long ago. And it was just because the AI was being democratized and bots were like this big buzzworthy thing. But now like that hype curve has gone down a little bit and you're starting to see more practical solutions. But
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of different spaces, right? In your thoughts or what comes to mind, what space do you think, oh, that's an opportunity that there's not a lot being built for?
That's not being built for. I think so. Before you said that, I was going to say future of work. I think like remote work has been really accelerated just in the last 6 months,
Yeah.
and so I think a lot of people are finding for the first time like they're working from home. Maybe they've never done it before, and so they're thinking about how do I be more productive? Like how do I do things that maybe before required an in person. And so maybe there's like meeting tools, collaboration tools. I
Mm.
think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I do think people have definitely like focused on that area on the startup side. There's been a lot of like great, remote work, future of work startups. In terms of stuff that's not being developed, a lot of that, from my vantage point, is like industry specific, right? Because
Mm.
there's a lot of industries where off the shelf tools don't work super well, but no one's built good tools for them that are like just for them. And so you can imagine maybe like Salesforce is a great CRM, but maybe if you work in like oil and gas, like you need something really different, right? Or maybe
Mm.
healthcare, you need something really different. And actually, like somebody built Viva, which is now I think like a $20 billion company that's just like a CRM for healthcare. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities where you take some industry that's like pretty big, but maybe a little bit old school, and they're on pen and paper and maybe fax, and you could build digital tools for them, and it really like levels up and accelerates that industry.
That's actually really, really powerful. No, and the future of work is definitely a big one. And it's one where for me, being and just studying the landscape for quite a few years now, it's crazy how COVID-19 fast tracked things, and
Yeah.
where there's still a lot more to be built, and a lot of a room for innovation long term. Let's get into a little bit about how you got started in venture capital, man. You've worked with Google, you've worked with LinkedIn, a lot of great companies. What inspired you to start Susa Ventures?
Uh, Honestly, it happened by accident for me. So, as you mentioned, I worked at these companies. So, I worked at LinkedIn and Factual, the two startups I was at. I was there at roughly like the dozen people to 50 people phase, and so I really enjoyed that experience. Like, I enjoyed being part of a tight knit team. Like, it felt like every single person was important and like making an impact because the companies were so small.
Mm.
And so when I left Factual after 4 years there, this is back in like late 2012. I was actually thinking I'd be a startup founder. And so I had some ideas in mind, like nothing I was really married to yet. But the one thing I felt like I was missing is I'd been at these great like startups at, the 10, 15, 30 person phase. I'd never seen like what it's like with two people or four people. And I wanted to learn more about that. And so when I left the last software engineering gig, one of my coworkers there approached me and was like, hey, like I'm going to leave soon too. I have a few angel friends. We're thinking of starting a seed fund. But all of the angels were like on the business side. So they came from like
Mm.
sales or marketing, and they wanted somebody technical to look at the products and like really dive into whether, technology is like working well, if the founders are good on the technical side. And so I thought like, oh, this is great. Like this sounds like a really fun thing to try. Like I never really thought about venture investing, and I could do this for a year or two and meet a lot of the founders at like that 2 to 4 person phase and learn from them. And then when I start a company, like I'll be a lot better prepared. And so that was the
Mm.
plan. These angels and I, like, and we became like close friends really quickly, but we invested as an angel group for a few months. And then about 6 months in, we're like, okay, this is working pretty well. Like, let's try to raise a fund around it. And over this time, like over that first 6, 12, like 18 months, I basically went from like, I'm going to do this for a year and start a company to maybe I'll do it for 2 years and start a company. And then towards the end, it was like, no, you know what? Like, I don't want to start a new company. Like, this is sort of a new company by itself. And like the investing job is like really fun and rewarding in a lot of ways.
Mm.
And so, I basically decided like, this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Wow, man. No, that's fine. And when you shared the story about how you came up with the name Susa Ventures, man, you got to share that story. The gorillas, because I think that's a powerful story for a name, and it kind of speaks to how the thesis of any venture firm should be around how are you creating that community with the founders.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's kind of a funny story because when my partners and we got together, and we're like, we're angel investing, and we're like, okay, we should start a fund. Like, what should we call this fund? And we start brainstorming, and I think everyone comes out with like names of mountains and peaks, and like kind of a lot of the venture names you see. And there's nothing wrong with them, but I think partly we weren't super inspired by them, and part of it was like they're all taken, right? Because you look up like Summit Ventures and you're like, oh, there's like 2 of those already. So So we started brainstorming like, okay, let's try to get more creative. And so we're trying to, throw a bunch of ideas out there. And one of the things we realized is like 3 out of the 4 partners at the time had seen this group of gorillas in Rwanda called the Susa family. And so we all had like this really great experience that is really rare because about 3,000, I think 3,500 people a year are allowed to see them. They just give out like 10 individual permits per day. And so the fact that like, yeah, so like the fact that like 3 of us had seen this, gorilla family that only a couple thousand people see each year was like, that felt like a really interesting, kind of insane coincidence. And so, we thought, oh, like, let's do Susa Ventures. And so one is like, I think we felt like it was pretty brandable, right? Because if you search for Susa, like not a lot comes up versus if
just gorillas.
Yeah, exactly. And even there, like gorillas don't have great SEO,
That's so true.
But yeah. So it was pretty brandable. And then also, these gorilla families have these like great tight knit family groups, like they support each other, they help each other. And we thought that was a good analogy for like building a venture fund in a new way, which was less about like just the financial relationship or like a one-to-one relationship between the investor and founder, and more of like a community that you're really building where everyone's working together, even though they're working on their own companies.
No, that's so powerful, man. For you, who have been some of the portfolio companies in Susa Ventures that you've been really excited about investing in over the last 7 years?
So I'll give 2 answers here. So one is we've been fortunate to invest in a couple of rocket ships. So we're a seed investor in Flexport, which is now like, I think a $3.5 billion company. We're investors in Robinhood, which just raised funding at like an $8 billion valuation. So those have been fun to watch because they've just been going like up and up and up the whole time. And I'd never seen that up close so dramatically. Like even at LinkedIn, like today it's big, but when I was there, we went, I think, from like 40,000 members to like 1 million or 2, but it was over a couple of years. It was like slow and steady, like 5% every week for like 100 weeks. But like with Robinhood, like they I think they created a wait list and they had something like 300,000 people on the wait list before they even launched. And so like seeing stuff like that and like watching that company grow has been really exciting. And same thing on the Flexport side. Like I think they ramped up from 10 people to like 1,500 in like 5-6 years. And so I'd never seen that before. That's been really awesome to watch. The other thing I actually really like in terms of founders that inspire me is the founders that they actually kind of like either struggle or just like takes a while in the early days. Because sometimes like you have an idea and you're like, okay, I want to do something for, I don't know, like game analytics or something. And so you start building something and you build for a few months, you launch it and there's like a little bit of traction, but like not enough. It's like, okay, what if instead of game analytics, it was analytics for some other industry? And you like kind of pop around, you're like, okay, maybe it's analytics for healthcare. And then you're like, okay, analytics didn't work, maybe it's something else for healthcare. And it takes like a year or 2 or maybe 3 to like figure out like what you should be building. And I think that's like a tough time, right? Because you're building, your resources are limited. Maybe you're not taking a salary or taking a minimal salary. And it feels like you're not making a lot of progress. And so I think a lot of people, when faced with that, they'll do it for 3 months or 6 months and they're like, screw it. Like I'll go work at Google or like I'll go join somebody else's startup. But we've had like some founders in our portfolio that just like, they stuck it out for a long time. And so 2 that come to mind are the founders of Periscope Data, which is like an analytics tool for analysts that use SQL. And like Simple Legal, which is a tool for legal ops teams and corporate departments to manage all their like legal projects and relationships and things like that. And those are 2 companies where in one of the cases they went through a couple of pivots before figuring things out. In the other case, like they didn't have a lot of funding, so they actually hit the right product right off the bat. But they had so little funding that like the founders just took no salary for a year. I think they did like minimum wage for a year or something. And so I think seeing those companies where it takes a few years to really get going, and like maybe you're seeing all your peers where like they spent 2 months working on a prototype, they launched it, it takes off, and you're sitting here like, shit, I've been working on this for like 2 years and it's still going. And so for those founders, like watching them go through that, but also like not give up and keep trying. And then eventually like they basically hit the nail on the head and then things start really skyrocketing. And it's really exciting to see that, right? Because it feels like just like so like something like they worked so hard for. And so it's really awesome to see them like get the success they deserve.
Yeah. Do you think grit is probably the most important skill for entrepreneurs and founders?
I think that's definitely up there, right? Because a lot of times things don't work super well in day one, and it just takes time and like, time and patience. But even when things do work well, like you still end up having ups and downs eventually, right? And so I think if things are going well and you can do like that phase, but then maybe you have like a year where some like huge competitor pop up right now, instead of being like in a place of power, you're like, shit, now we're scrambling to like figure out, how to deal with this big competitor. And I think if you're like mentally not 110% committed, and if you like don't have good grit and high grit, like it's hard to keep going in some of those cases, right?
Mm.
Like maybe that competitor comes up, you spend a few months trying to compete with them and you're not making much ground, and it's easy to be like, shit, like maybe this will be 10 more years, like I don't know if I want to do 10 more years, let me like try to sell the company, right? And so I think the founders that can go past that and just keep pushing, I think those are really special people.
Mm. Especially in B2B too, where you need a lot of grit. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sales cycles. Really building an organization that's customer obsessed and is service oriented. There's a lot of you need a lot of grit. You can't just expect it to be, oh, in 6 months we're going to have something that's sustainable. So I really, really love that. For you, Leo, what has been a career achievement that has been probably one of your greatest in your amazing career thus far?
That's an interesting question. I would say I think starting Susa Ventures is it for me. Because I did want to start a company at some point, and I think this is probably as close as I'll get, but it does feel a little bit like a startup where we're growing the team, we're trying to figure out like how do we pitch ourselves, like what's our product, like what other products can we add. So it's been really exciting to be part of that process with like such a good group of people, and it's also like, we've now founded, I think, over 100, maybe almost 110 companies over 7.5 years.
Wow.
They've gone on to like create billions of value. Like Robinhood, for example, just like really upheaved the brokerage commission side of like brokerages, right? Like all the brokers.
And I use Robinhood. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, all the brokers, like this huge industry went commission free, like I think about 6 months ago, just because of like how fast Robinhood was growing, and like they could just, they had to like try to figure something out to compete. And like on the one hand, it's like it's an interesting piece of news, but on the other hand, it's like there's now tens of millions of people, or maybe more, that used to pay a crap load on commissions, and now that money is going into like their retirement accounts, right, or their their investment accounts. So I think seeing stuff like that's exciting, and obviously when we back companies like that, that company was going to be successful whether we invested or not. But it is rewarding to like be able to help. Sometimes you're like, hey, maybe like 100th more successful, or 100th like or like shorten their time to success by a little bit. So I find that really rewarding to like help people out with like recruiting, or advice when they need help in some situation. Again, obviously like all the success and credit goes to the founders, but like we try to help a little bit, and it feels really good when like we're able to help a little bit.
I love it. I love it. Man, what would be your biggest tips to the entrepreneurs who are listening to this right now in the guide community, who want to hopefully build the next Flexport or Robinhood?
Well, if you're building one of those, please talk to me. That's my biggest tip. I think to the point about grit, I think trying to find something you're passionate about is really important, right? Because that's going to get you through like the low points. So there are examples of people where they just made a spreadsheet and they're like, here's a bunch of industries and McKinsey reports, like what looks interesting, let me do that. I think sometimes those companies succeed, but it's a lot harder, right? Because if you're not emotionally attached to it, like it just it's much more difficult to go through the downs of building a company. So I think that's the biggest thing. Like try to find something you're really excited about, but also you got to think about like where can you create value, right? And I think people often don't think about that if they come from different perspectives, right? Like you might be, let me back up. So like for me, I was an engineer for a while. And so a lot of times, like I think about the product and I think about it too much, right? Where I'm like, I'm just going to build a better mousetrap and I'm going to ignore whether like people would pay for it, or like if there's any way to like get it in front of people. And so I think having an idea you're excited about, but also having it be a viable business and like figuring out as fast as possible is really important. And a lot of times that comes with like being able to deal with discomfort, essentially, right? So I have an idea, I'm an engineer, I just want to go build for 2 years and then go raise a bunch of money, but like it doesn't work that way, right? What I really need to do is build for a month or two and have a prototype and then try to sell it for a year. And it's really hard because like I've never done sales, I don't know how to do sales. It's very tempting to just be like, well, I'll do sales in 6 months, like let me just add a few more features first. And I think a lot of times when founders think that way, like they get stuck at some point, right? Because they only work on the things they're good at or comfortable. But you got to work on everything to like make the company successful.
Yeah. And I think to your point too, you have to focus on the product experience. And if the product experience is right, it's gonna sell.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I'm such a huge advocate for is like there's a lot of products out there with a horrible, horrible experience. But when you nail the experience, people are gonna see the value.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you see things like that with like Uber's growth, right? Because I think,
Yeah,
there's
they
still sort of
nailed
a
it.
question mark on their economics, but like in the early days compared to taxis, that was just like such an amazing step up.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. You know what, Leo? Thank you so much for being on another episode of Unleashing the Future of Work, a guide podcast. Where can the next Flex Sport or Robinhood entrepreneur within our community find you and connect with you, man?
Well, I'm on Twitter, probably too much. So my handle there is my first initial last name, so L Polovets, LPOOLOVETS. And then also for email, I'm leo@susaventures.com. So I'm happy to chat with people that want to chat about building a company or companies or ideas they're thinking about or anything else.
Love it, love it. Make sure you all connect with Leo at susaventures.com as well as follow him on Twitter. His Twitter feed is pretty awesome. Leo, man,
Thanks.
it has been a joy to have you on the podcast. We should have you on another episode, man, in the future.
Sure, happy to do that. Thanks
Dude,
so much
thank you
for
so
having me.
much, man. Appreciate you, man. Have a good rest of the day, brother.
You too, Tim.
All right, man. With that said, thank you all so much for being on another episode, for listening to another episode of Unleashing the Future of Work, a guy podcast. Wasn't Leo awesome? He's amazing. He's amazing. Definitely follow him and check him out. With that said, if you are interested in being on a future episode as a guest, or you know someone that would be a wonderful guest, please check us out at UTFOW.com and apply to be a guest. And if you are interested in having beta access to Guide, the bite-sized skills training platform for remote teams, I would love for you to sign up for our early beta access program. We're going to be launching in less than 2 weeks, and it's about a week, and the product looks amazing. So definitely check us out at guideapp.co if you are interested in being a part of our early beta program. With that said, you all, please be well, be great, and make sure that you're taking care of your loved ones this lovely Thursday afternoon. All right, y'all. Peace.